Sawadee-ka. Hello and welcome to Daily Wisdom, Walking the Path with the Buddha. Today is our Pali Canon and English study group, and we're studying Volume 2. We're going to be in chapters 41 through 51 today. We're finishing up this book, and then next week we're going to be moving into the next volume, which is Volume 3. It's titled Foundation in the Teachings. So we're going to be studying chapters 1 through 10 next week. But today, since we have 11 chapters, we're going to go ahead and go through our normal process of having a student read, then I'll share some teachings on that. Then I'm going to open up to any and all questions that you guys have, whether you're in Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom. So if you're in Zoom and you would like to volunteer to read or ask a question, all you need to do is electronically raise your hand. I'll be able to see that, and then you can unmute your microphone, and then you'll be able to either read or ask a question. For anybody who's in Facebook or YouTube, if you would like to ask questions, you can put that into the comment section. Same as people in Zoom, you guys are welcome to put your questions in the comment section, and then I'll be able to see that and answer your question. So we're going to just jump right in because we have 11 chapters to study today. So let me know if somebody would like to read. Looks like Pat's volunteering to read, so go ahead, sir.
Not understanding and not penetrating the Four Noble Truths. Monks, it is because of not understanding and not penetrating the Four Noble Truths that you and I have roamed and wandered through this long course of the cycle of rebirth. What for? It is, monks, because of not understanding and not penetrating the noble truth of discontentedness that you and I have roamed and wandered through this long course of the cycle of rebirth. It is because of not understanding and not penetrating the noble truth of the cause of discontentedness that you and I have roamed and wandered through this long course of the cycle of rebirth. It is because of not understanding and not penetrating the noble truth of the elimination of discontentedness that you and I have roamed and wandered through this long course of the cycle of rebirth. It is because of not understanding and not penetrating the noble truth of the way leading to the elimination of discontentedness that you and I have roamed and wandered through this long course of the cycle of rebirth. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Pat. So here we have a teaching from the Buddha explaining how it's because one has not understood and penetrated into the Four Noble Truths that an individual has continued to be reborn over and over and over again. Because the Four Noble Truths is the very first teaching that you need to understand in order to be able to get onto the path to enlightenment, because that's where you're understanding the problem in the mind, the cause of the problem, the elimination of it, in the path forward. Without that important teaching, you would never understand that your discontent feelings are actually being caused by your own mind. We would continue to go around the world thinking that it's other people that are causing these feelings. So therefore, we would never understand craving and desire, attachment, the mind longing, yearning, and how that's causing the mind to experience discontentedness. So therefore, we would never be able to implement any of the other teachings to be able to train the mind to experience the peace and joy that the Buddha is guiding you to, which is the enlightened mental state. Getting to enlightenment, not only will you experience that peace and joy and all those other qualities that I talk about, but you'll be outside of the cycle of rebirth at that point. So the whole reason why someone hasn't gotten to enlightenment is because they haven't understood and penetrated the Four Noble Truths. The whole reason why they keep being born in the cycle of rebirth over and over is because they haven't penetrated into the Four Noble Truths. So the Four Noble Truths is a very beginning teaching that it's important to learn. And I suspect that you guys that have been learning with me regularly, you guys have already explored this. In fact, in this particular program back in this volume, chapter 7, we explored it there, but I've also taught it many other times in all of the foundational programs. If anybody needs a refresher on that, let me know. But the Buddha is just helping you to be able to see that, hey, this is the real beginning of the path, because that's where you can have that real breakthrough to finally understanding what's causing these feelings, and then you can actually resolve it through applying all the other teachings. And it's because we haven't gotten to enlightenment that we keep experiencing rebirth over and over and over again. Now, remember that the cycle of rebirth is nothing to believe in. You should never believe in any of the teachings of the Buddha whatsoever. But as you grow and develop on the path to enlightenment, you can independently verify this. And by the time we get to volume 11, that's what we'll be exploring. And volume 11 is all about the realms of existence and the cycle of rebirth. So let me know what questions you guys have here on this chapter. You can put that into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom, or you can raise your hand in Zoom and ask any questions that you like. Okay, I don't see any questions anywhere. So let's go to the next one. Is there someone who would like to read this one? Okay, looks like Vibhav. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you. The mind has attained the end of craving. To the round of many birds I roamed, without reward, without rest, seeking the house builder. Painful is birth, again and again. House builder, you are seen. You will not build a house again. All your rafters broken, the rich poor dismantled, immersed in dismantling. The mind has attained to the end of craving. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Vibhav. So this is actually a teaching from the Dhammapada. Whenever you see this DHP, that stands for the Dhammapada. It's formally part of the Pali Canon, but if you understand the history of the Dhammapada, you'll understand why what you're reading here is very different than other teachings that you've seen from the Buddha. When you normally see the Buddha teaching, he's teaching in what we call the suttas or the discourses. This is where he's actually laying out line by line by line in a way that you can independently verify what his teachings are. And that's about 25 volumes of the 45 volumes of the Pali Canon. But then there's other components to the Pali Canon as well, which one component is the Dhammapada and another component is the part that makes up the discipline for the ordained practitioners and how they're supposed to live their life. These are what's called the three baskets. Well, what the Dhammapada is, and understanding the history of this, is that it was actually written by scholars about 1200 to 1300 years ago. It was about 12 or 1300 years after the death of the Buddha that they actually wrote it. And what they did is they looked at the teachings of the Buddha, the suttas and the discourses, and they tried to summarize his teachings in a verse form. And that's why it sounds very poetic. And it's, not really what the Buddha actually said. It's not his actual words. So while it's here and it's in this book series, whenever you see DHP, you can understand that it's a summarization or interpretation by scholars of what they think that the Buddha taught. If you know anything about scholars, scholars are usually more interested in the historical context of somebody like the Buddha, or, from more of an anthropologist perspective of how did his teachings influence humanity. They're typically not interested in enlightenment itself. They're not usually interested in learning and practicing to actually experience enlightenment. They're more interested in just kind of, how did this individual affect the trajectory of humanity? So what you're seeing in the Dhammapada, it typically is not something that you can independently verify because it's not the words of the Buddha. It's kind of like an interpretation of somebody's thoughts of what the Buddha actually taught. So sometimes people look to the Dhammapada as the words of the Buddha. You will see a lot of people in the world that are studying the Dhammapada and they think that these are the words of the Buddha, and they don't understand that what they're reading is not the actual words of the Buddha. So rather than going to a scholarly interpretation of what the Buddha taught, what I teach you guys is to go to what the Buddha taught. That's the suttas, that's the discourses. So that's a better place to actually gain insight into the path to enlightenment. But there are a few chapters here and there in this book series that are in here from the Dhammapada because it's kind of interesting to study just from the standpoint of it does have a word of truth to it, and it's kind of an interesting way to think about the teachings of the Buddha. And this is one of those examples. So here, this particular verse is here. It says, through the round of many births I roamed. That's true, right? We've all roamed through all these many births without reward and without rest, right? We just keep roaming and roaming and roaming and roaming with no reward and no rest. And then seeking the house builder. Here, the house builder, this is referring to craving, that we're seeking to build this new house, which is this new existence over and over and over and over again. And then painful is birth again and again, which is true. It's wonderful when a new baby comes into the world. But if you ask any mother, it's actually quite painful to experience childbirth, right? And also, if you look at the children, when they come out, they're not laughing and giggling. When they come out, they're crying, right? So it's quite painful. So now, house builder, you're seen. Meaning, hey, I see you craving, desire, attachment. I see what you're doing there. I see you, right? You will not build a house again. Meaning, I'm not going to let you keep coming back into the world. I'm not going to allow this craving to keep motivating the ability for a being to keep being reborn over and over and over again. All your rafters broken, the ridge pole dismantled, immersed in dismantling, the mind has attained the end of craving. That's what you're doing on the path, is you're destroying craving, desire, attachment in the mind. You're eradicating it. The Buddha actually uses these words, destruction and eradication, in his speaking, in his teachings. So one of the ways to think about that is you're destroying the ability for this house to be built. But of course, you're getting to this peace and joyful mental state. But this is just kind of another way to look at it and kind of keep this in mind that, yeah, you're knocking down this ability for this craving to just keep perpetuating in the world and keep coming back over and over and over again. Of course, rebirth and the cycle of rebirth has never been used by the Buddha as a way of scaring you or fearing you or guilting or shaming you into learning and practicing his teachings. But it is something to be able to understand that, yeah, by getting to enlightenment, you are going to be able to escape that cycle of rebirth where you don't need to keep coming back into the world over and over and over again. And if you keep this image in your mind that you're dismantling and destroying this ability for this to occur, this can be helpful. So let me know what questions you guys have here, either about this particular teaching here or the Dhammapada as a whole. You guys are welcome to ask me anything that you like. Okay, I don't see any questions anywhere. So now let's go to the next one, which is chapter 43. And it looks like Kristen would like to read that one, and then maybe Judy after that. Go ahead, ma'am.
Thank you, teacher. In this fathom-long body, I say, friend, that by traveling one cannot know, see, or reach the end of the world, where one is not born, does not grow old and die, does not pass away and get reborn. Yet I say that without having reached the end of the world, there is no making an end of discontentedness. It is in this fathom-long body endowed with perception and mind that I proclaim the world, the origin of the world, the elimination of the world, and the way leading to the elimination of the world. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Kristen. So first, this word fathom, this is a unit of measurement. It's about 6 feet. So we know that the Buddha was about 6 feet tall. That's how tall he was. So in this fathom long body means that he's in this 6 foot body because it was a unit of measurement. Okay, so he says, I say, friend, that by traveling, one cannot know, see, or reach that end of the world where one is not born. So by continuing to crave, by continuing to seek, desire, longing, yearning, you can't get to the end of where the cycle of rebirth is over for you, where one is not born, does not grow old and die, right? You can't get to that ending of the cycle of rebirth by continuing to chase after things and having craving, desire, attachment. So then he goes on, he says, yet I say that without having reached the end of the world, there is no making an end of discontentedness. So without having gotten to the point where you can see the ending of craving, desire, attachment, you can't actually make an end to discontentedness. And then he says, it is in this fathom-long body endowed with perception, meaning views and opinions, and mind that I proclaim the world, right? The origin of the world, the elimination of the world, and the way leading to the elimination of the world. He's not talking about the world in terms of like the universe or anything like that. He's talking about the ending of the cycle of rebirth. So he never declares whether the world, meaning the universe, is finite or infinite, if it's going to continue beyond any length of time. But we know the earth itself is impermanent because it has arisen, it changes, and it will fade away. But in terms of the universe as a whole, he never declares whether the universe is going to come to an end. But here he's using this word world to mean the cycle of rebirth. And he's using kind of the structure of the Four Noble Truths to be able to describe the ending of the cycle of rebirth. That it's through understanding craving, desire, attachment, and that's what's allowing these beings to continue to be reborn over and over and over again, that you need to be able to see that. And it takes your needing to be able to see that, to be able to then know that, yes, by eliminating this, then the mind can escape the cycle of rebirth. And it's dependent origination in volume 5, chapter 14, that's going to help you to be able to see this more closely. So let me know what questions you guys have here. Remember, you can put that into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom, or you can raise your hand in Zoom and ask any questions that you like. Okay, I don't see any questions. So we'll go to the next one, which is chapter 44. Is there someone who would like to read this one? Oh, I think it was Judy, actually. There she is. Thank you, Judy.
The perfectly enlightened one's complexion is no longer pure and bright. The limbs are all flaccid and wrinkled. Then the Venerable Ananda approached the perfectly enlightened one. Having approached and paid homage while massaging the perfectly enlightened one's limbs, he said to him, "It is wonderful, Venerable Sir. It is amazing, Venerable Sir. The perfectly enlightened one's complexion is no longer pure and bright. His limbs are all flaccid and wrinkled. His body is stooped, and some alteration is seen in his sense bases, in the eye sense base, the ear sense base, the nose sense base, the tongue sense base, the body sense base. So it is, Ananda. In youth, one is subject to aging. In health, one is subject to illness. While alive, one is subject to death. The complexion is no longer pure and bright. The limbs are all flaccid and wrinkled. The body is stooped, and some alteration is seen in the sense bases, in the eye sense base, the ear sense base, the nose sense base, the tongue sense base, the body sense base. This is what the perfectly enlightened one said. Having said this, the fortunate one, the teacher, further said this: "Fie on you, wretched aging which makes beauty fade. So much has the charming puppet been crushed beneath advancing age. One who might live 100 years also has death as a destination. Death spares none along the way, but comes crushing everything." Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Judy. So here, this is Ananda making an observation of the physical complexion of the Buddha. That, of course, even though he's a Buddha, the body's aging because it's impermanent. But what you notice here is something that they don't say, right? If you're familiar with the 6 sense spaces of the eyes, ears, nose, tongue, the body, and the mind, what they're talking about here is a decrease or an alteration of the 5 sense bases, the eye, the ear, the nose, the tongue, and the body. But notice that there's no deterioration or alteration of the mind. For an enlightened being, when you attain this permanent mental state, there isn't going to be a decline in the mind. Oftentimes we think of old age equals declining of the mind, and that's typically what you see in the world. As people are getting older, their mind deteriorates, but that's because people haven't trained their mind. You don't have to experience that. If you're training your mind, you can get to the point where as this body's aging, the mind stays crisp and sharp and bright. And that's what we can see here. It's what they're not saying. And there's other parts in the Buddha's teachings where he actually comes out and just says it, that his mind hasn't changed. Even though he's aged, there's no alteration to his mind. He talks about how his wisdom and his mind is just as crisp and just as sharp as it was when he was younger, even though he's of old age. So you can see that here too, because they don't mention that there's been any alteration or deterioration of the mind. So ultimately, he talks about how, of course, aging and the fading of beauty and death is going to come to all of us. We know that, right? Impermanence, it's going to happen, but you don't have to experience the deterioration of the mind. And that's one of the benefits of having trained your mind prior to any kind of deterioration of the mind. So let me know what questions you guys have here on this chapter. This is chapter 44. Okay, we don't see any questions anywhere. So let's go to chapter 45. There's someone who would like to read this one? Okay, Pat.
The Tathagata's final passing. Monks, for this reason, those matters which I have discovered and proclaimed should be thoroughly learned by you, practiced, developed, and cultivated so that this holy life may endure for a long time, that it may be for the benefit of peacefulness of the multitude, out of compassion for the world, for the benefit of peacefulness of heavenly beings and humans. And what are those matters? They are the four foundations of mindfulness, the four right efforts, the four bases of mental power, the five spiritual faculties, the five mental powers, the seven factors of enlightenment, the Noble Eightfold Path. And now, monks, I declare to you, all conditioned things are of a nature to decay. Strive on untiringly. The Tathagata's final passing will not be long delayed. 3 months from now, the Tathagata will take his final nibbana. Right I am in years. My lifespan's determined. Now I go from you, having made myself my refuge. Monks, be untiring, mindful, disciplined, guarding your minds with well-collected thought. He who tirelessly keeps to the guidance and teachings, leaving birth behind, will put an end to sorrow and despair. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, sir. So here we've got the Buddha giving his students a heads up that he's going to die in 3 months. This is how enlightened that he was. He knew the time when he was actually going to die. So wisely, he gave people a heads up, because if there's any kind of last minute teachings that they need or something they were unclear about, they had a 3 months heads up to be able to get the insight that they needed before he actually died. So here he's going through and saying, hey, if you would like to have this spiritual life, this life to get to enlightenment, endure a long time, meaning last in the world for a really long time, because that's what's actually going to be helpful and beneficial for the peacefulness of many, many people. And if you'd like to be able to maintain those teachings out of compassion for the world and benefit for all heavenly beings and humans, well, here are the teachings that you need to really focus on. Excuse me. These are the teachings that need to be focused on, and these need to be kept very strong and vibrant in the mind, because during the lifetime of the Buddha, the way that the teachings get preserved is in the mind. Sometimes I say in the heart, in the mind, but of course it's all in the mind, right? But saying that the teachings are preserved in the hearts and the minds of human beings means that we have this endearing, appreciation and gratitude towards the Buddha for these teachings. So these are like the core teachings that he's saying, this is what you need to be able to learn and practice closely. Of course, there's other teachings that you need to be able to understand, but this is the core. The four foundations of mindfulness in the four right efforts. You've learned those as part of the courses and programs that you guys have learned with me in other places. The four bases of mental power and the five spiritual faculties, as well as the five mental powers. These are things that I detail in the book. But these are things that are already part of other teachings that you're learning. Then there's the seven factors of enlightenment. These are teachings that help you to bring the mind out of a sluggish state and then from an excited state down into the middle. And then, of course, the Noble Eightfold Path. If there's any of these that you guys need help with, you can let me know. I don't teach specifically the four bases of mental power, the five spiritual faculties, or the five mental powers, because they show up in other parts of the teachings of the Buddha. And I don't call them out in this way that the Buddha does here, but he also doesn't typically call them out this way either. So these are the things that he's talking about staying close to and practicing closely. And I also give that list, a very similar list to this, in the foundational classes and courses that I teach. I share with you guys to learn the three universal truths, the Four Noble Truths, the Eightfold Path, the five precepts, the Brahma Viharas, the 10 fetters, the extensive meditation training, the seven factors of enlightenment. These are the things that I teach as well, because I know that this is what the Buddha actually taught, and this is what really needs to be understood in order to be able to make your way to enlightenment. But of course, there's other teachings that you need to learn as well, but there's the kind of core teachings that you would like to focus on. So let me know if you have questions on those. Then ultimately he says, okay, I declare to you all conditioned things are of a nature to decay. Strive on untiringly. So here he's explaining like, hey, even though this being is dying, of course this being is dying because this being is conditioned. So this being arose through existence and birth, it changed, and then it's going to fade away. So strive on for your own enlightenment. And he's explaining here that he's not going to be living for very long, just another 3 months before he reaches final enlightenment. I think I talked about this already in this program, but I'll just kind of summarize what final enlightenment is. If you guys haven't learned this yet, when somebody is in the cycle of rebirth, meaning they are unenlightened, when they die, this is referred to as death. Because if there's death, now this being has died, there's going to be rebirth in the future. This being continues to experience sickness, aging, and death, grief, sorrow, pain, displeasure, and despair because it's in the cycle of rebirth. But once you've gotten to enlightenment, you've dismantled and destroyed dependent origination. You are now outside of the cycle of rebirth. So we don't refer to it as death for this enlightened being. We refer to it as final enlightenment, because an individual can get to enlightenment in this life where you have no more mental pain. There's no more mental anguish. There's none of those painful feelings. Your mind's not having any discontentedness whatsoever. But you will still experience physical pain. And you need that physical pain as an enlightened being, because if you were standing too close to a fire and the body was feeling that heat, you need to know to move away from the fire. Whereas if you didn't have that little bit of physical pain, you wouldn't have that feedback and you wouldn't know to move away from the fire and the body would get damaged. But the physical pain that you experience in the unenlightened state is very different than what you experience in the enlightened state. In the unenlightened state, you're going to experience not only the physical pain, but you're going to experience the mental anguish as well. It's like getting hit with 2 darts. Say you stumped your toe as an unenlightened being. You're going to experience the physical pain, but then there's going to be this mental anguish right away afterwards because the mind is craving permanent comfort of the body. And because of this craving in the mind, there's this mental anguish. It's like getting hit with a second dart. And now that physical pain is actually heightened and it's more intense because of the mental pain. But an enlightened being, let's just say they stump their toe, they're going to experience the physical pain, but there's no mental anguish whatsoever. So the physical pain is very muted, but you're still going to experience this. So by the time you get to enlightenment and you're outside of the cycle of rebirth, you're experiencing physical pain, but it's just very muted compared to what you used to experience when you were unenlightened. So when this being dies, this enlightened being, that's where the breakup of the body and the mind, they separate. And now there's no more physical pain, right? You can't create that while they're still alive. So that's why it's called final enlightenment. The final thing has been eliminated, which is the connection between the mind and the body. That's now been eliminated. You can't eliminate that as long as there's life. And of course, an enlightened being isn't going to kill themselves. That's not something they would do. So that's why we refer to it as final enlightenment, because they're not dying. They're experiencing the final breakup, the final elimination of this last attachment, so to speak, where there's still some physical pain. And now when that disconnection happens, there's no longer any physical pain. So then the Buddha just goes on and just kind of says some things here towards the end, just to kind of let his students know that, he has suggested to them to be untiring, be mindful, be disciplined, guard your minds with well-collected thought. This is something you should be practicing at all times. And then if you keep to the teachings, then you will end this continuous cycle of rebirth and you will end this continuous sorrow and despair. So let me know what questions you guys have here on this chapter. You can put that into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom. Or you can raise your hand in Zoom and ask any questions that you like. I just thought I'd scroll down here because I suspect that I've put in here, maybe I haven't. I thought I maybe put in here what those 3 things are that I don't usually teach. Here it is right here. But I didn't put the detail here. There's a later chapter where I put the detail of what the 4 bases of mental power are, the 5 spiritual faculties and the 5 mental powers. It's not in this chapter, but you're going to come across it in the book series. So it looks like Chris has a question. He says, "Hi, Teacher David, how are the 5 spiritual faculties covered elsewhere?" You'll see it in the book series, that there's another chapter where the Buddha talks about these. I think it's in volume 7. If you have these in PDF format, you can just use one of those, like mental power or spiritual faculties, and you can search through all the PDFs and you'll be able to find where I actually highlighted and I put in there exactly what they are. If you have any issues finding it, just let me know and I will find it for you. But there are things that you already are familiar with, like concentration and mindfulness and things like this. But he just groups it differently when he's describing it as the 4 bases of mental power, 5 spiritual faculties, and 5 mental powers. So if you need any help finding that, let me know. But it is in the book series. It's in the discourse, and then I highlight what it is by explaining exactly what it is, what each one of those are. Okay, I don't see any other questions anywhere. So let's go to the next chapter. And there was a lot here that I shared because I explained what final enlightenment is. I explained the death of the Buddha as well, about how the Buddha actually died. So if you guys haven't read this, this will be really helpful for you to be able to read that. And here's chapter 46. It looks like Judy might be interested to read that. Go ahead, ma'am.
One who sees the teachings sees me. Enough, Bakali. Why do you want to see this foul body? One who sees the teachings sees me. One who sees me sees the teachings. For in seeing the teachings, Bakali, one sees me, and in seeing me, one sees the teachings. Monks, even if a monk taking hold of my outer robe were to follow right behind me, placing his feet in my footsteps, yet if he were to be craving for sensual pleasures, strong in his passions, evil in mind, corrupt in his decision-making, his mindfulness muddled, unalert, uncentered, his mind scattered, and his sense spaces uncontrolled, then he would be far from me and I far from him. Why is that? Because he does not see the teachings. Not seeing the teachings, he does not see me. But even if a monk were to live 100 leagues away, yet if he were to have no craving for sensual objects, were not strong in his passions, not evil in mind, uncorrupt in his decision-making, his mindfulness established, alert, centered, his mind at singleness, and his sense bases well restrained, then he would be near to me and I to him. Why is that? Because he sees the teachings. Seeing the teachings, he sees me. Thanks.
Okay, thank you so much, Judy. So here, let me just back up a little bit, give you guys a little bit of backstory here. So as the Buddha was preparing to die and giving everybody a heads up 3 months in advance that he's actually going to die, he started to get kind of like a little bit of complaining from his students, some of the ones who weren't practicing the teachings very closely, because they didn't understand impermanence, and they were like begging and pleading with him not to die, right? Because there were some people who understood, of course, he's going to die, and they weren't attached to him. But there were other people who were attached to him. There's actually a story that when the Buddha was giving that discourse about he was going to be dying in 3 months, that some of his students came and were complaining because they were like kind of sorrowful and grieving that he was going to be dying in 3 months. And they were complaining about this other ordained practitioner who was like back in the corner meditating, and he wasn't grieving and he wasn't sorrowful. And they were complaining about him. And they were telling the Buddha that, look, he's not even grieving, he's not even sorrowful. And the Buddha was like, well, he's actually practicing the teachings and you guys aren't. That monk over there is the one who's actually, essentially closer to enlightenment. That's not what he said, but that's essentially what he was saying. So that's what was going on here, that this particular student, was begging and pleading with the Buddha not to die. And that's why the Buddha's like, enough, right? Like, stop all of that. Like, it's just impermanence, let go, right? And that's why he says, why do you want to see this foul body? Right? Because he's already shared the teachings. He spent 45 years sharing these teachings. Why do you need to see this body? So he says, one who sees the teachings sees me. Because if you've learned the teachings of the Buddha and you've independently verified them, everywhere you look in the world, you can see his teachings. That you can see the universal truth of impermanence. You can see the universal truth of discontentedness and how people get discontent based on craving, desire, attachment. You can see the Four Noble Truths, the Eightfold Path. You can see generosity when people are practicing it and how it's helping their mind. You can see all these kinds of things. So one who sees the teaching sees me. That's where you'll get to the point where you'll have no doubt that the Buddha actually lived, because you'll know his teachings so well that you'll see them everywhere around you. But then also, one who sees me sees the teachings, meaning the Buddha was a living, breathing, walking example of his teachings. If you saw him, you would see his teachings because he's practicing the teachings. So then he goes on saying a few more things along those lines. But then he goes on and he gives these particular things, and he says, hey, if somebody was practicing in this way, even though they were right next to me, they would not be close to me because they're not actually practicing the teachings very closely. And then he talks about this individual who is practicing the teachings very closely. So when you see a discourse like this, you can actually pluck out the things that it's important for you to be able to practice. So right here where the Buddha talks about having no craving for sensual objects, that's one thing that you would like to develop. That's going to help you to eliminate your sensual desire, where this person is not strong in their passions. Passions is just another word for craving, desire, attachment, where oftentimes people use that word in a favorable way. Like if somebody gives a very impassioned speech, or they're very adamant about a certain topic, maybe they're even beating on the table as they're talking about things. Sometimes people look at that as a wholesome quality, but that's not a wholesome quality. That means someone has craving, desire, attachment. They're longing, they're yearning, and the mind is quite aggressive and hostile and bitter there. Or if somebody gives a speech, like a public speech, and they start crying during the speech, people are like, oh, I was so moved by that speech. But this is just someone who has craving, desire, attachment. That the passion that people talk about, like in love songs and stuff like that, they're describing craving, desire, attachment. That's not actually love that they're describing in these love songs. It's actually craving, desire, attachment. So the Buddha is helping you to be able to see, to scale all that back and don't allow the mind to chase and chase and chase and have those strong, deep passions. But also, you're not on the other side where you're dull and lethargic. You're in the middle where you understand you can pursue goals and objectives with enthusiasm and ambition and motivation to move towards something. And then, of course, he's talking here about not being evil in mind. That's about your moral conduct and the way that you conduct yourself through your intentions, speech, and actions, right? So these are qualities that you would like to be able to practice. And then uncorrupt in your decision-making. The way that you make decisions, you would like to have wise decisions. Then mindfulness well established. That's the 4 foundations of mindfulness, being aware of the mind. And then that's where the alertness, the concentration, the crispness comes in, where the mind is centered and stabled. And then the mind has this singleness where you can focus on a single object with concentration. And then the sense spaces are well restrained, meaning that as the mind is pulling, now you're able to restrain that. And of course, by the time you get to enlightenment, you're not going to have to restrain the mind because it's not going to be pulling, right? But if you're restraining your mind and your mind is well restrained, then you're practicing the teachings close. And these are things that you can use here to be able to see what it is that you need to be able to do on the path to enlightenment. And the Buddha is giving you the guidance of how to do that in the Eightfold Path. So because one sees the teachings, they see the Buddha. And over time, as you understand his teachings more and more, you'll see his teachings everywhere around you. So let me know what questions you guys have here. You can put this into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom, or you can raise your hand in Zoom and ask any questions that you like. Okay, I don't see any questions anywhere. So let's go to the next chapter. This is chapter 47. Is there someone who would like to read this one? Okay, it looks like Keely and then Chris after that.
One who resides in the teachings, here among learns the teachings, the discourses, makes prose and verse, explanations, verses, inspired spoken verses, quotations, birth stories, amazing amounts, and questions and answers. But he does not pass the day solely in the learning the teachings. He does not neglect seclusions, but devotes himself to internal serenity of mind. It is in this way that a monk is one who resides in the teachings. Thus, monk, I have taught the one absorbed in learning, the one absorbed in communication, the one absorbed in recitation, the one absorbed in thoughts, and the one who resides in the teachings. Whatever should be done, monks, by a compassionate teacher, out of compassion for his disciples, aspiring for their welfare that I have done for you. These are the feet of trees. Monks, these are empty hearts. Meditate, monks. Do not be complacent, lest you regret it later. This is my instruction to you. That's all. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Keely. So here, you guys have seen some of these teachings because I use some of these in the classes. You've probably seen this one where it says, meditate, monks. Do not be complacent lest you regret it later. This is my instruction to you. So now you're seeing more of the full teaching now that you're exploring the entire discourse. So here, the Buddha is talking about how to reside in the teachings, because that's what you'd like to do. You'd like to soak up the teachings, mentally absorb the teachings. That's how you're going to actually get to enlightenment. You're not going to be able to just allow the waves of the Buddha's teachings to brush over you. You know, sometimes people talk about all this poetry and they talk about the Buddha's teachings in such words like that, with all this poetry, like as if the waves of the words of the Buddha are just going to brush over your mind. This isn't the way that it works. You need to really soak the mind in the teachings. And that's what the Buddha is teaching you here, is to reside in the teachings. So the way that you do that is you learn the teachings, right? You need to be able to investigate them. Well, what are the teachings? It's the discourses, which are the suttas, the mixed prose and verses. You'll see that as you go through the book series, you're going to see different little kind of things like that. The explanations are when somebody expounds on the teachings, and then there's other things like verses, inspired spoken phrases, quotations, verse stories, amazing accounts, questions and answers. So you're going to need to learn all of these kinds of things, that you don't pass the day solely learning, right? But he does not pass the day solely in learning the teachings, right? Because you can't just learn the teachings. You need to get out into the world and actually practice them. He does not neglect seclusion, but devotes himself to internal serenity of mind. It is in this way that a monk is one who resides in the teachings, right? So you can't just keep your nose in a book all day long and learn the teachings. Even though they didn't have books during the lifetime of the Buddha, we do now, right? You just can't keep your nose in a book all day long. You need to go out into the world and actually practice the teachings. You can't go to a cave somewhere in the remote mountains and actually get to enlightenment by just sitting in that cave. Because as soon as you come out of the cave, now you're interacting in the world and your mind can easily become discontent. So you're going to need to, yes, learn for a certain period of time, but then you apply those teachings in your day-to-day life. So thus, monk, I have taught the one absorbed in learning, the one absorbed in communication, the one absorbed in recitation, the one absorbed in thought, and the one who resides in the teachings, right? So this is what they would do in order to be able to get to enlightenment during his lifetime, is they actually had to recite the teachings. You're going to see this in the words of the Buddha, where he talks about that's an important part of getting to enlightenment. Where today we don't have to recite the teachings, but there are certain teachings that you need to commit to memory. The Eightfold Path is one of those. So you're going to need to commit that to the memory. So then ultimately the Buddha says, whatever should be done, monks, by a compassionate teacher out of the compassion for his disciples, aspiring for their welfare, I have done for you. Meaning the only reason why I've taught you is out of compassion for you, which is concern for the misfortune of others, aspiring for their welfare. Because the Buddha got to enlightenment. He could have, if he chose, just gone back to the palace and just lived a life of riches and just been there and enjoyed that enlightened mental state. But he was dedicated to be able to share the teachings with other people. He had that compassion for all beings. And that's why he ultimately ended up sharing his teachings. And then he says here, okay, don't be complacent. It's important to meditate. So here he's helping the students to be able to understand how to reside in the teachings. As he's getting closer and closer to death, he's helping them to understand like what it is you need to be doing in order to be able to get to enlightenment. So let me know what questions you guys have here. Remember, you can put that into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom. Okay, not seeing any questions. So now we'll go to chapter 48. And I think it was it Chris? Or who was it? If you could raise your hand again, you'll pop up to the top. There he is. Okay, Mr. Chris. Go ahead, sir.
One who has attained nibbana in this very life. Monk, if one teaches the teachings for the purpose of fading away of strong feelings towards aging and death, for its fading away and elimination, one is fit to be called a monk who is a speaker on the teachings. If one is practicing for the purpose of fading away of strong feelings toward aging and death, for its fading away and elimination, one is fit to be called a monk who is practicing in accordance with the teachings. If, through fading away of strong feelings towards aging and death, through its fading away and elimination, one is liberated by non-clinging, one is fit to be called a monk who has attained nibbana, enlightenment, in this very life. In the case of birth, existence, clinging, craving, feeling, contact, the six sense bases, name and form, consciousness, volitional formations, and ignorance, the discourses are identical except for the reference to each of the conditions of dependent origination.
All right. Thank you, sir. So here the Buddha is just talking about this fading away of strong feelings towards aging and death, because oftentimes an individual in the unenlightened state has that, right? That as you age, you might have these discontent feelings, or as you're getting close to death, having these discontent feelings, not only for your own aging and death, but other people around you that are close. So you would like to get to the point where you don't have that, where you've eliminated any kind of strong feelings towards aging and death, that you just understand, yep, it's normal. This body's going to get old. There's going to be wrinkles. There's going to be gray hair. There's going to be moles and growths and hair coming out of different places that didn't used to have hair coming out of those places. And, this being's going to die, and you can just come to terms with it, right? It's just going to happen. No big deal. But oftentimes, we're really struggling with that whole thing. So as you let that go more and more, then the mind's getting closer and closer to enlightenment. So let me know what questions you guys have here on this particular chapter. Okay, I don't see any questions. All right. Now we're on chapter 49. Is there someone who would like to read this one? Okay, Kristen, go ahead, ma'am.
Thank you, teacher. 3 urgent tasks. Monk, there are these 3 urgent tasks of a farmer. What 3? First, the farmer swiftly yet thoroughly plows the fields and swiftly yet thoroughly harrows it. Next, he swiftly sows seeds. Then he swiftly irrigates and drains the fields. These are the 3 urgent tasks of a farmer. This farmer has no psychic potency or spiritual might by which he could command, let my crops start growing today. Let them mature tomorrow. Let them bear grain the day after tomorrow. But with the change of the seasons, there comes a time when the crops grow, mature, and bear grain. So too, monks, there are these 3 urgent tasks of a monk. What 3? The undertaking of the training and the higher virtuous behavior, moral conduct. The undertaking of the training and the higher mind, mental discipline. And the undertaking of the training and the higher wisdom. These are the 3 urgent tasks of a monk. This monk has no psychic potency or spiritual might by which he could command. Let my mind be liberated by the taints, by non-clinging today, or tomorrow, or the day after tomorrow. Rather, as this monk trains in the high virtuous behavior, moral conduct, the higher mind, mental discipline, and the higher wisdom, there comes an occasion when his mind is liberated from the taints by non-clinging. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Kristen. So here, these are the 3 urgent tasks, and they match up to the 3 sections of the Eightfold Path. So remember, the Eightfold Path is the wisdom section, the moral conduct section, and the mental discipline section. So this is a short way of referring to the Eightfold Path. The Buddha will describe his teachings in different ways, like we were just talking about with the mental powers, the spiritual faculties, and things like this, the Buddha will kind of organize his teachings in different ways depending on how he's talking about them. So here he's pointing to the Eightfold Path and saying this is the urgent task, because that's what's actually going to lead to your enlightenment. And he's relating this to an analogy with farming, because people would have been very familiar with task of farming, where a farmer has these certain tasks that are very important for them to be able to do. They thoroughly plow the fields, they harrow the fields, which is like put the lines where they're ultimately going to plant the seeds, and then they plant the seeds. And they ultimately are then going to be irrigating or watering the seeds. So these are the things that a farmer needs to do, because they're not going to eat and they're not going to survive if they don't do these kinds of things. And the same thing is true for an individual who's on the path to enlightenment, that they're going to need to undertake these three things, which is training in the virtuous behavior, which is the moral conduct, training in the mental discipline or the higher mind, and then training in the wisdom. Those are the three sections of the Eightfold Path, and this is the Buddha pointing to that, but more in a summary format. So he's not going through and naming each individual factor, where other discourses, and depending on how he's talking about it, he'll name each individual factor. So this is what you would like to be focused on. When you're first getting started, you need to really commit it to your memory. And I know many of you guys did reach out in order to be able to get me to send you the study guide for the Eightfold Path. I've now put that on our website. So if you need that, or you need an updated version of it, because I've put a few more things in there to help guide you guys, it's on our website. You can go to the website, buddhadailywisdom.com, click on free books. And then if you scroll down towards the bottom where it says free resources, just under the chanting sheet, you'll see the study guide there to be able to help you to study for the Eightfold Path, because you really need to commit that to memory. That's what's going to allow you to practice it and experience the results and the improvement, is to actually study it and commit it to your memory, because that's how you'll then be able to practice it. So it's the Eightfold Path that is the three urgent tasks, is developing your wisdom, your moral conduct, and your mental discipline. So let me know what questions you guys have here. And by the way, one thing I like to add here is, even though the Buddha is using this term, three urgent tasks, it's not like you need to rush off and go do that, right? He's just kind of putting some importance behind the things that he's saying. There's no such thing as rushing to enlightenment. There's instead wise decisions that are going to gradually take you to the point where your mind is experiencing more and more qualities of enlightenment. So let me know what questions you guys have here. Okay, I don't see any questions, so we're moving right through these chapters. So it looks like Pat would like to read this next one. Go ahead, sir.
Tathagata resides compassionate towards all living beings. Venerable Sir, doesn't the perfectly enlightened one reside compassionate towards all living beings? Yes, Hedman, the Tathagata resides compassionate towards all living beings. Then why is it, Venerable Sir, that the perfectly enlightened one teaches the teachings thoroughly to some, yet not so thoroughly to others? Well then, Hedman, I will question you about this. Answer as you see fit. What do you think, Hedman? Suppose a farmer here had 3 fields, one excellent, one of middling quality, and one inferior, rough, salty, with bad ground. What do you think, Hedman? If that farmer aspires to sow seed, where would he sow it first? In the excellent field, in the field of middling quality, or in the field that was inferior, the one that was rough, salty, with bad ground? If, Venerable Sir, that farmer aspires to sow seed, he would sow it in the excellent field. Having sown seed there, he would next sow seed in the field of middling quality. Having sown seed there, he might or might not sow seed in the field that was inferior, the one that was rough, salty, with bad ground. For what reason? Because at least it can be used as fodder for the cattle. Hedman, just like the field that is excellent are the male and female ordained practitioners to me. I teach them the teachings that are good in the beginning, good in the middle, and good in the end, with the right meaning and phrasing. I reveal the holy life that is perfectly complete and pure. For what reason? Because they reside with me as their island, with me as their shelter, with me as their protector, with me as their refuge. Then headmen, just like the field of middling quality, are the male and female household practitioners to me. To them, to them too, I teach the teachings that are good in the beginning, good in the middle, and good in the end, with the right meaning and phrasing. I reveal the holy life that is perfectly complete and pure. For what reason? Because they reside with me as their island, as their shelter, with me as their protector, with me as their refuge. Then, headmen, just like that field that is inferior, rough, salty, with bad ground, are the ascetics, Brahmins, and wanderers of other communities to me. Yet to them too I teach the teachings that are good in the beginning, good in the middle, and good in the end, with the right meaning and phrasing. I reveal the holy life that is perfectly complete and pure. For what reason? Because if they understand even a single sentence, that will lead to their welfare and peacefulness for a long time. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, sir. So here, the Buddha is an expert at when someone asks him a question, he basically asks that person a question based on their life in order to help them see why he does what he does. Because he could have just said, well, I do it this way, but the person wouldn't have learned as much. By the Buddha saying, hey, what would you do in this situation? He's like, well, I would do it this way. Well, okay, he's doing it the exact same way. The Buddha is doing exactly the same way. And this helps the individual to be able to learn better, to be able to see it that way. So he's talking about this farming analogy once again, where there's an excellent field, a middle quality field, and then a field that is inferior and salty and doesn't really have very good soil. And the farmer says, well, I would plant seeds in the excellent field first, then the middling field, and then maybe I might plant some seeds in this inferior quality of field. Well, the Buddha ultimately talks about how he does the same thing, that he will teach the male and female ordained practitioners the teachings that are good in the beginning, middle, and end. So he's teaching all the groups of students the same teachings that are good in the beginning, middle, and end. And he sees the ordained practitioners as being those that are the ones that are of excellent quality. The reason why is because they've left the household life and now they're devoting their entire day to learning and practicing the teachings. The ultimate goal of a Buddha is for their teachings to sustain in the world for an unlimited amount of time, just for an extended amount of time. The longer that the teachings are in the world, the better, because more and more people can actually get to enlightenment. The best way to ensure that the teachings continue in the world is for people to get to enlightenment. If you can get, as an individual who ultimately is a Buddha, if you can get countless people to enlightenment, which would be a factor or a criteria of you being a Buddha, then it's sure that your teachings are going to continue, because as all of these people are getting to enlightenment, they're ultimately going to know the impact of that mental state, and they're then going to share those teachings with other people. They're not going to just keep that to themselves. It's kind of like if you went out and had a really good meal at a restaurant, you're going to tell probably 5 or 8 or 10 of your friends about how great this food is. You're not just going to keep it to yourself. Well, getting to enlightenment is beyond any restaurant that you've ever eaten at, or any kind of movie that you've ever seen and you've told your friends how great this movie is. Well, getting to enlightenment is way beyond any of that. So if the Buddha can help people get to enlightenment, the more people that he can get to enlightenment, the more it ensures his teachings will continue. So of course, he's going to prioritize the teaching of the ordained practitioners, because those people are dedicating the vast majority of their day to be able to learn and practice the teachings, aside from doing like personal care and, bathing and, eating and things like this. And then the next group of people that he talks about is the household practitioners, because they're also dedicated to learning, but they don't have as much time because they're busy carrying water back and forth to the well, planting in the farms and harvesting food and making clothing and preparing food and things of this nature, right? So they don't have as much time. So in terms of a Buddha making wise decisions to ensure his teachings continue in the world, he's going to be interested to see them continue with the people who have the best opportunity to be able to get to enlightenment. And in his lifetime, it was the ordained practitioners. We might actually say today that household practitioners have an even better opportunity of getting to enlightenment than they did during the lifetime of the Buddha, because household practitioners don't have all those timely tasks and those burdensome tasks to do, that they actually have so much more free time in their life today, because we've systematized all of those things. In fact, household practitioners have so much time in their life, they tend to actually spend it just scrolling mindlessly on social media or watching YouTube video after YouTube video after YouTube video. So you can actually prioritize the development of your mind and actually potentially get to enlightenment in a much easier way than they did during the lifetime of the Buddha. So the Buddha looked at the household practitioners as a middling quality just because they didn't have as much time to be able to learn and practice. And he was making wise decisions to ensure his teachings could continue beyond his life. But then lastly, he talks about this inferior quality. This was aesthetics from other teachers. This is Brahmin, which are those Hindu priests that were doing rites, rituals, and ceremonies, just really coming to the Buddha for learning about moral conduct. That's really all that he was, all they were looking for. So he still taught all of these people in the same way, but he just knew that this group of people were more likely to actively learn and practice to get to enlightenment, and this group was less likely to be able to do that. But at the end of this, the Buddha shares that even if someone just understands a single sentence of his teachings, it's going to lead to their welfare and peacefulness for a long time. So say, for example, like you guys have probably been on maybe tours with me, or at least you know that I conduct tours here in Thailand. And as I go around and do tours, there's usually, a certain number of people that travel with me, and I go around from temple to temple to temple, and I do tours, and I teach people about the teachings of the Buddha on these tours. And there's a certain group of people that are with me through the entire 8-hour day learning in that tour. But then every once in a while, there's kind of like somebody who was at the temple and they're there on their own. They didn't come with us, and they'll come by and they'll kind of listen for 5 minutes or 10 minutes or 20 minutes or even longer sometimes, but ultimately they're going to go away because they have other plans that day. Well, if they came in and they just listened for 3 minutes, for example, and all they hear in that time that they're listening to me, which are the teachings of the Buddha, if they hear that loving kindness eliminates anger, and now all they do from that point forward, understanding that one single sentence, is they start trying to be more loving and kind, that's going to be very helpful for their welfare and peacefulness for a very long time, because they just understood that one sentence, that loving kindness is going to help eliminate anger, right? So it's these kinds of things that if somebody just understands a single sentence of these teachings, it would actually be really helpful for them. You've probably understood more than just a single sentence of the teachings of the Buddha, which is why perhaps you've seen more progress than just a little bit of marginal progress here and there, and why you're more dedicated to learning and practicing his teachings. But for someone who even just understands a single sentence, they're going to get some benefit out of it if they end up choosing to practice that. Even if they just hear the word enlightenment and they understand that there's the possibility that they could get to this peaceful and joyful mental state, that's something that they can have in their mind, and maybe they pursue it at some point in their life. So the Buddha is sharing his kind of priority here in terms of teaching, but really ultimately what he's saying is that he teaches everybody exactly the same, and that even if they understood a single sentence, that would be helpful for them. So let me know what questions you guys have here on this chapter. You can put that into Facebook, YouTube, or in Zoom. Okay, I don't see any questions anywhere. So let's go to our last chapter. We actually are finishing 11 chapters sooner than we normally finish 10. So looks like Chris would like to read this one. Go ahead, sir.
4 observable benefits for one who learned the teachings by ear. Monks, when one has learned the teachings by ear, recited them verbally, examined them with the mind, and penetrated them well by view, 4 benefits are to be observed. What 4? Here, a monk masters the teachings, discourses, mixed prose and verse, expositions, verses, inspired spoken phrases, quotations, birth stories, amazing accounts, and questions and answers. He has learned these teachings by ear, recited them verbally, examined them with the mind, and penetrated them well by view. He passes away muddled in mind and is reborn into a certain group of heavenly beings. There, the happy ones recite passages of the teachings to him. The arising of his memory is sluggish, but then that being passes quickly, reaches distinction. This is the first benefit when one has learned the teachings by ear, recited them verbally, examined them with the mind, and penetrated them well by view. Again, a monk masters the teachings. Discourses, mixed prose and verse, expositions, verse-inspired spoken phrases, quotations, birth stories, amazing accounts, and questions and answers. He has practiced those teachings by ear, recited them verbally, examined them with the mind, and penetrated them well by view. He passes away muddled in mind and is reborn into a certain group of heavenly beings. There, the happy ones do not recite passages of the teachings to him, but a monk with psychic potency, who has attained mastery of the mind, teaches the teachings to an assembly of heavenly beings. It occurs to him, this is the teachings and discipline in which I formerly lived the spiritual life. The arising of his memory is sluggish, but then that being quickly reaches distinction. Suppose a man were skilled in the sound of a kettle drum. While traveling along a highway, he might hear the sound of a kettle drum and would not be at all confused or uncertain about the sound. Rather, he would conclude, that is the sound of a kettle drum. So too, a monk masters the teachings. The arising of his memory is sluggish, but then that being quickly reaches distinction. This is the second benefit to be observed when one has followed the teachings by ear, recited them verbally, examined them with the mind, and penetrated them well by view. Again, a monk masters the teachings, discourses, mixed prose and verse, expositions, verses, inspired spoken phrases, quotations, birth stories, amazing accounts, and questions and answers. He has learned those teachings by ear, recited them verbally, examined them with the mind, and penetrated them well by view. He passes away muddled in mind and is reborn into a certain group of heavenly beings. There, the happy ones do not recite passages of the teachings to him, nor a monk with psychic potency who has attained mastery of the mind, teach the teachings to an assembly of heavenly beings. However, a young heavenly being teaches the teachings to an assembly of heavenly beings. It occurs to him, these are the teachings and discipline in which I formerly lived the spiritual life. The arising of his memory is sluggish, but then that being quickly reaches distinction. Suppose a man were skilled in the sound of a conch. While traveling along a highway, he might hear the sound of a conch, and he would not be at all confused or uncertain about the sound. Rather, he would conclude, that is the sound of a conch. So too, a monk masters the teachings. The arising of his memory is sluggish, but then that being quickly reaches distinction. This is the third benefit to be observed when one has learned the teachings by ear, recited them verbally, examined them with the mind, and penetrated them well by view. Again, a monk masters the teachings, discourses, mixed prose and verse, expositions, verses, inspired spoken phrases, quotations, birth stories, amazing accounts, and questions and answers. He has practiced those teachings by ear, recited them verbally, examined them with the mind, and penetrated them well by view. He passes away muddled in mind and is reborn into a certain group of heavenly beings. There, the happy ones do not recite passages of the teachings to him, nor does a monk with psychic potency who has attained mastery of mind teach the teachings to an assembly of heavenly beings. Nor does a young heavenly being teach the teachings to an assembly of heavenly beings. However, one being who has been spontaneously reborn reminds another who has been spontaneously reborn. Do you remember, dear sir? Do you remember when we formerly lived the spiritual life? The other says, I remember, dear sir, I remember. The arising of his memory is sluggish, but then that being quickly reaches distinction. Suppose there were two friends who had played together in the mud. by chance, they would meet one another later in life. And one friend would say to the other, "Do you remember this friend? Do you remember that friend?" And the other would say, "I remember, friend, I remember." So too, a monk masters the teachings. The arising of his memory is sluggish, but then that being quickly reaches distinction. This is the fourth benefit to be observed when one has learned the teachings by ear, recited them verbally, examined them with the mind, and penetrated them well by view. These are the four benefits to be observed when one has learned the teachings by ear, recited them verbally, examined them with the mind, and penetrated them well by view.
All right. Thank you, sir. So what the Buddha is talking about here, I can summarize it in a really easy way for you. That what he's talking about is that in a previous life, if you've learned the teachings and you've practiced the teachings, then when you get into another life, you are going to remember that. You're going to have some memories of that previous time when you actually studied the teachings. That's one of the benefits of having learned the teachings and actually practiced them, that in a particular life, you can have the ability to recall some of those teachings. If you're studying the teachings in this life and they just seem so straightforward and so clear and obvious to you, there's the potential that you could have studied them in a previous life. If they're a lot more cumbersome, a lot more challenging for you, you might not have studied them in a previous life. So this is how you can see that the mind has benefited from actually studying in a previous life. So some of you guys may have studied these teachings in a previous life, and now you're finding your way back to the teachings, and it becomes along a bit easier. The Buddha here is talking about in the heavenly realm that these things are happening, but it happens here in the human realm too. It's not just the heavenly realm that this is happening. So he's talking about how there's residual memories in the mind of a being from having studied those teachings in a previous life. And this is how he's helping you to be able to see one of the benefits of studying. But of course, the goal is to get to enlightenment in this life. It's not about the next life, but this is where you can see the Buddha talking about these residual memories from previous lives having now come into this new mind, whether it's in the heavenly realm where he's talking about here, but this also happens in other realms as well. So let me know if you guys have any questions here on this chapter. Okay, I don't see any questions anywhere. So I'm actually surprised that we actually studied 11 chapters today in a very short period of time. You normally it takes about an hour and a half to study 10. So we've studied them in a short period of time. As you guys have questions, don't hesitate to ask those, whether it's in class or outside of class. That's what our time together is for you guys to be able to ask questions. So always feel free to ask questions. And on cue, there's Judy with a question. Go ahead, ma'am.
In this passage, your summary is very helpful, by the way. But he says there are 4 observable benefits. So it's learn, reflect, practice. And what is the 4th one?
So here, essentially what he's talking about is he's talking about memorying or memorizing the teachings and then being able to recall them later. That's what he's talking about.
Okay.
But the 4 individual benefits are where when he's saying that he quickly reaches distinction, he's talking about getting to enlightenment. I didn't go through and parse it the way that you're asking. So he's learned those teachings by ear, examined them. That's all the same. He passed away muddle-minded, is reborn in a certain group of heavenly beings there. The happy ones recite. The first benefit observed is the teachings, penetrating the world by view. I think it's essentially the same. I think the only difference between each paragraph is how quickly he's reaching distinction. And also that whether there is somebody actually teaching the teachings or not.
Okay.
But essentially,
so more or less about the progression of his enlightenment. Okay.
Yeah. What he's talking about is remembering the teachings from a previous life, and in each one of these 4 situations, whether it's someone who's teaching them to you or not, there's still the ability to remember the teachings. So in each situation, there's less and less teaching going on in that new existence, but there's still memory. Because by the time we get down here to this last one, there isn't anybody who is teaching.
Right.
it's just like, hey, do you remember that we used to do that in the past? It's like, yeah, we remember. So now the memory has come back. So
Okay, that makes sense to me now.
Yeah, it's just talking about no matter whether there's someone that's teaching or not, you're still going to remember the teachings.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, let me see if we have anything else anywhere before I just wrap up. Okay, I don't see anything. You're welcome, Mayuli. Pleased to help you. Okay, so what I'll do then is just end like I always do by thanking you guys. Thank you for reading. Thank you for your questions. Thank you for just participating in class and dedicating some time to learn and practice the teachings. Next week, we're going to be in Volume 3, which is titled Foundation in the Teachings. We're going to be in Volume 3, Chapters 1 through 10, and we're going to be in that book for a while. It's quite a few chapters in there. So, really take your time. In Volume 3, you're going to see a whole plethora of teachings. That's why it's titled Foundation in the Teachings, because you're going to get a real spectrum of multiple teachings from the Buddha. And that's why it's early on in the book series, because that Volume 3 has a really nice way of kind of sharing a little bit of the teachings from all the entire book series, kind of consolidated into one book. At one time when I was traveling around and I used to read the teachings as I would travel, I would take a book with me, and it was typically that book, the Volume 3, because it had so much variety of different teachings. So you're going to see a whole spectrum of teachings from the Buddha in just that one volume. So whenever I used to travel, I used to just take that one volume with me. So if you ever decide that you're interested in taking a book with you, I'd recommend that one or the first volume, because that third volume really gives you a whole spectrum of teachings. So that's what we'll be exploring next week. And tomorrow in our group learning program, we're in Chapter 1, which is titled Universal Teachings, Love, No Harm, and Good Morals. So I'm going to be sharing that at 9 a.m. and 9 p.m. And then, of course, we have our evening meditation at the temple at 6:30. And then we have our 4-part series on loving kindness meditation that this week I'm going to be in part 2. So thank you guys again, and I'll perhaps see you guys in a future class. Be well and take care. Sawadee ka.
Thank you again for watching. Enjoy your meditation. Look forward to seeing you online and answering any questions that you might have. Thank you so much.